This is a video podcast from the Canadian Centre for Architecture. The following is the third of three parts of the CCA's Urgency event, held in June 2008 with Greg Lin and Yang Ho Chang. It is the second annual presentation of Urgency after the 2007 event with Rem Koolhaas and Peter Eisenman.
So I think that we can perhaps start from some questions that came out in both of your presentation. For example, the idea of production, the idea of materials, the point that you made in your presentation, Greg, is relating to use and reuse of technology, present, also the reference that you did to the new development of technology in the Los Angeles area relating to military research and applications, which is projecting a situation very similar to the Second World War effect, the impact that this technology they had, developed during the war, they had in the transformation of architecture after the war. And perhaps we can have a discussion also with Yang O about that, the kind of technology, materials that he is suggesting to use, a kind of high-tech, low-tech. I think is not really like that. So perhaps I would like to start to ask you, Yang O, which is your reaction to this idea of a production that Greg has introduced? And vice versa.
Actually, I don't know Greg's work well, but I know he's interested in computation, so that's why I didn't talk about certain things. Especially I myself are not doing much. I don't think it's fair. But what's really for me is most frustrating is the fact. So what would be a good example? So say an iPhone. Probably it's built by people who don't have much education and don't take much an interest in the making of the phone. But yet the quality is guaranteed by the process. And then every time when we talk about the quality of building and then the knowledge of building in terms of the contractor or building team is an issue, and also if again the contractors or the laborers would pay enough attention to the quality and so on. I think that's wrong, because they are not meant to do that. They are there just to perform the basics. So there ought to be a way by using technology, including of computation, if it's about digital fabrication or prefabrication, so that a building will be manufactured like an iPhone, like all the other things we have today. We do that at MIT, but in my office we're not doing much at all.
Well, I mean, for me, I would just say anecdotally, I live in a Sears Roebuck house that was built in 1902. So it's 106 years old. It was ordered by post, and the final order was placed over a telegraph. It was manufactured in Chicago, put on a train, shipped to Los Angeles, put together in 3 days on top of an existing foundation. And there's over 400 Sears Roebuck houses in my neighborhood, and no two are the same. And so when you talk to somebody like Chris Bangle at BMW, he says the automobile industry was 50 years behind architecture in the 1970s. That their dream is to be able to produce a car the way those Sears Roebuck houses were produced.
Now it's 50 years ahead of us, at least.
No. He claims now they're only 2 or 3 years behind. That's what he, but so I really believe that, you know, architecture tends to be a very tragic discipline. It's, you know, when some high school kid is smart and creative, but a little bit tragic, I think their guidance counselor tells them to go into architecture because they read Ayn Rand or something. But in fact, we're, you know, the most cutting-edge industry in terms of how to take mass-produced elements, put them together in unique ways, and produce buildings which are never identical. Now, the construction industry's got problems because there's the wet construction of people digging in the ground, which is very regional and local. But then there's steel and glass and metal and all those things which have been industrialized for 100 years. So, and that's globally. But figuring out how to put that together is something that people don't pay that much attention to. There's only a few architects that are tackling the problem. I mean, I think Frank Gehry is the most advanced, and Frank's software company now is 2 or 3 times the size of his architectural office. So, and it's adopted by the builders and contractors and developers, not yet by the architects, which is amazing to me. But so, figuring out how to put together this industrialized culture that's over 100 years old with the kind of labor of preparing foundations and assembling things, to me, that's the urgent question. And, you know, I don't really think, you know, there are that many people that are looking at it right now.
How much this production point is changing or shaping in a different way the work of an architectural office? How much are changing the paradigm? For example, you have shown your office in China. I was curious to understand how, in which way they work inside your office there in respect, for example, to Greg's office. I know you go there, you have the tables, you have the computers, and you have machines in the office. There is a kind of mix of production which is incorporated in the office in a part, and then you have outside a network of production, which makes me thinking of the kind of very sophisticated industrial system of productions like the fashion industry in northern Italy, in which you have a very dispersed system of over-specialized production, a core center. There is a lot of movements around these kind of things. So I was curious to compare also what this kind of way of working, thinking, is affecting your work and your work in a different context.
Well, for me, you have to be a little bit brave because, you know, for the house, for instance, if you look at the drawings, which we had to prepare an incredible number of drawings, you know, with multiple offices and consultants and all this stuff, you know, 300 drawings for a house, which is crazy. But if you look at the contents of the drawings, there are these clouds everywhere that says not in contract, all over the place. So we had to do the drawings to just say, well, this stuff is going to come into the house, but general contractor, don't worry, it's going to come on a truck and you're just going to assemble it. And so if any of that stuff was the wrong dimension, was manufactured incorrectly, didn't fit together, that was all on me and not covered by any kind of insurance that exists. So talking to machines is really what we spend about more than half our time doing, honestly, is figuring out how to not put a thing in a drawing to be interpreted by a builder, but how to get a shape talking to the machine that's going to make it and get it delivered and assembled. And so it's a totally different kind of logistics, and it's much more like Young Ho, when you said figuring out how to work in a craft industry with no craft. For me, it's becoming much more a craft industry where I'm the one responsible for how the things get made, not the general contractor. And it's tricky. You got to figure out how to get paid for all that work. You have to get figured out how to own it intellectually, and also how to give it a life outside of a particular project, which is a big opportunity, I think, for this stuff.
But Young Ho, I think that perhaps also you had some buildings using earth as a material. So I wonder, the image of your office was quite suggestive one. How do you work there? How do you face this problem?
I know it. When I show the image of our office, people wonder how nostalgic I am. Actually, I'm very practical. Chinese people generally are anyway. We need all these spaces to do two things. One is to outdoor yard spaces to experiment with construction and material. And during the summer, we grow vegetables for our own lunch, so that we have to be in a place like this. So for us, it's this. Our interest in anything also slightly unconventional, the client would of course question it, and then the construction forces would say, we never done that before. We don't know what to do. And then in order to do it, we have to say, we'll teach you, but we actually don't know how to do it ourselves. And then we do the experiments. So like to make the ram earth wall, it's an age-honored tradition in China, but nobody today knows how to do it. So I send out, talking about SOS help, email to architects in Switzerland, Germany, France, Korea, to get all kind of information, recipes of how to mix earth and so on. And then we experimented ourselves, like cooking. And then, basically I asked the client to give me 2 weeks, and then we went to the construction team and said, now let me tell you, you do this, it would be okay. Again, it's, it's okay if you're something of a smaller scale and something more low-tech. We're not able to, we don't really have the resources to experiment with something actually would use more technology, which would be so much nice.
You, moving between United States and China, you have a very clear picture of what is happening on both sides and also what is happening on China. And in some of your older interviews and discussions, you were raising some questions about the cultural impact of this Western development in China in respect to the culture there, in respect to the urban fabric and so on. So which is your vision of this kind of situation? Do you think that you spoke of fusion at the end, but what is the real situation now?
That's actually a tough question. I can't actually really rationalize why I'm doing this, but now I'm doing it. I do try to think, what are the differences and so on. What's interesting is that, especially in American academia, there are not a lot of, intelligence about design and architecture and so on. But yet, however, because of the general, conservative kind of atmosphere of the American society, the channel from this intelligence to application doesn't exist. In China, the attitude is far more open. And however, often that because we're doing too fast, we do not have a mature industry to support some of these. And then in the end, we don't really fully also engage design intelligence. So these are the major difference for me.
And Greg, you have been working in teaching and working in Europe. You presented Abu Dhabi, the project. What is your experience? Last year we had here Peter Eisman speaking of his vision of the world from his office in New York. What is your vision of this kind of more globalized system of architectural production, teaching? You explained a little bit about Abu Dhabi before, but you work also you did project in Spain, in the Netherlands. So what is your perception from the American point of view of these kind of experiences?
I've never had success with a client who wanted something that had a precedent. So I have to say, in terms of global problems, I don't see any difference between, 2,500 Korean American Presbyterians who want a church, but they know what they don't want. They don't want a cathedral or a Scandinavian modern, or, they couldn't tell you what a Korean Presbyterian church is, but they can tell you what it's not. So for me, I think, the Abu Dhabi Pavilion, the building across from LACMA, they all are places with identity problems. And they're places without a clear vision of context. So for me, I have little successful experience working in a vacuum, like in a tabula rasa site. I really haven't ever tried it. So I don't really see a huge cultural difference, only because the places that I tend to work already have cultural difference built into them. That might not be the case in China.
Yeah.
I mean, China may have a monolithic culture in a way that would be very difficult for me to engage with. But in a way, even the Abu Dhabi project, it's super confused. I mean, it's the Venice Biennale that's going to be the operator, and Tom Krenz is provoking it, and Abu Dhabi is sponsoring it through the royal family, but you get there and the developers that are making it happen are all from Orange County, and the engineers that are doing all the work are from the Netherlands and Australia. So everywhere I go, it's always different combinations of mixture, but always mixture. And I think China is a much more, to me, from the outside, never having worked there, challenging place, because it has a large, culture without that kind of diversity built into it yet, if I'm not making assumptions. But
Yang Oh?
No. Well, what's really exciting about China, of course, is going through this tremendous transition. Mm-hmm. So on one hand, it really is about this kind of uncertainty of a new Chinese culture. And nobody knows what that is. And then, of course, as architects, and we have the opportunity to make suggestions. Mm-hmm. But yet, and then, as I was saying before, there are things, things not necessarily a material process, but attitudes are still very Chinese and very, in a way, very old. Mm-hmm. It's a combination of these two would produce certain things, which could be very interesting, also could be disastrous. It depends. Mm-hmm. So I think in China that today what we have seen is often only the number of icons built by the major international stars, and they actually they experience a very particular part of the China, and actually it is about how the resources from the command economy and market economy is being put together in the most efficient way, so they can be up, and then also with, of course, these newly acquired wealth and ambition. So the image making of architecture is very important. But there are all other aspects. So it's not a singular kind of a condition.
You made, in this respect, also a reference to this postmodern culture, which I think it is a very interesting way, because the way that you frame that is in the cultural sense. How much of this is affecting your vision about fusion, about the cultural identity in China. You also teach at MIT, you work there. Would you like to go a little bit further about that?
You know, I taught in the U.S. for many years before I returned to China to practice. So when I was leaving the U.S., there were at least 2 or 30 words. So in the academia, you don't say them. Otherwise, unless you want to criticize them. One is postmodernism. The other one is new urbanism. And I fully understand why, because I was very much against them in a way. I felt that because the way these ideas got married into the mainstream society and economy, really didn't produce in architecture or cities any better than what we had before. However, after working back in China now over 10 years, the more and more I realize the world we are living in again, it really it is a postmodernist one. You know, Greg talking about the pop culture. I myself, I still don't know how to work that into my work. I love graphic novels. You know, I'm a big fan of Chris Ware and an American graphic novelist and so on. And that's in the Asia culture, and you see that actually even more pronounced. You know, people here probably more familiar with Japanese culture, the kind of love for gadgets. That's actually very Asian, and so on. And I just started to think, so maybe we ought to reconsider the notion of postmodernism as ideas and see what other kind of architecture can be generated from that set of ideas other than the one now we are too familiar with. And then actually I started to rethink about new urbanism as well. Because I do see there's there are ideas rather than the very fixed little kind of a retro 19th century American town image.
And you too, you had some forbidden words that you mentioned there. And your practice, and your practice also is a very so-called, this idea, for example, in the production of the house, is a kind of very postmodern strategy of working with different technology situation, mixing different things together. How do you react to this point of Yango?
Well, I think there's the term postmodernism, even in the 80s, nobody really knew exactly what it meant. And I think it's, by the way, at a research institute, there aren't that many scholars working on the postmodern period, but you could actually do it now and it would reflect in an interesting way. I mean, I've always suspected Rem was the last postmodernist, and now that I've seen Dubai with all the Ledoux shapes and stuff, it's clear he's a real solid postmodernist, but not in a historical postmodern sense. But I really don't think architecture's done the intellectual work yet on that period for us to know exactly what all the nuances are. But for me, I remember, Michael Eisner didn't make a move without a whole room full of architects helping him figure out what to do. I mean, he would do a new Disney, and he would have, Bob Stern on his board, and, everybody, Eisenman, Isozaki, Graves, they were all really involved in popular culture back then. It's something nobody talks about. Bob had a television show, Pride of Place, that basically, controlled everybody's minds for a few years in America. So I think that period in the 80s was very interesting for a lot of reasons, but the engagement with entertainment culture, for me, was very, very provocative. And, now going to Las Vegas and seeing, actually from Montreal, like all these Cirque du Soleils with their $250 million robotic stages that lift and flip people around and spin in the air. I mean, it's unbelievable what's going on in terms of moving robotic architecture at the mass spectacle scale. And I think it's a new kind of postmodernism. So, but anyway, I really feel a void in scholarship right now that somebody needs to do the work on that period so we could really say, like, what's historical postmodernism, what's entertainment postmodernism, what's, you know, philosophical postmodernism. It's all, there's no handles on it yet.
Don't worry, we take over that.
Yeah, okay.
Now, I think that Yang O is going to leave because there is a plane leaving very soon. So I think that I would like to open the discussion. If you have any question, you can come here. Please, if you can come here, tell your name.
No, I just want to make a little comment because the idea is what is urgent in architecture. And I was taking careful note of your interesting work and your experimentation. I have a suggestion, is that, in my opinion, even in your own discourse, what is urgent in architecture is to stop saying that we work with high techniques, high technology, low technology. We'll be inundated of high technology. Architecture in itself is and should be high technology. And we have high or low techniques according to the development of certain or other places of the world. But I guess the commitment to do architecture of high technology is not the commitment to do architecture with latest techniques or old techniques, but the commitment to do architecture meaningful, poetically, ethically, experientially, conscious of the implications of the use of techniques. So I'm very surprised that you guys, being very respectable characters in the profession, still misunderstand a very simple concept. We don't work with technology, we make technology.
Well, I think that most of the points that you raise have been already addressed by Greg and by Yang O in their points about certain perspective, social, sustainable behind, and the presentation that did Greg, but about the use of technology and the role of the architects in shaping that. That is, I would like to leave Greg to answer that, because, you know, there are, in terms of production, there are always, which we are addressing now in this morning mainly, there is also a problem of finality of this kind of production that is always present in the work that the architects they are doing. But what I feel is interesting in this is a change in the way of thinking that has been produced by this kind of research and this kind of work. So it's not only making technology, not making technology, using technology. What I feel is interesting is a reframing of the conceptualization of architecture through the technology in a totally different way. Greg, you can speak of how it has changed in this kind, affected you in directly this kind of thing.
Well, I would also just say that architecture isn't just making buildings, it's defining the aesthetic for the moment. That almost, I mean, we could go through and with very, very few exceptions, could you show, and when I say aesthetic, I mean a shared cultural value about living, form, design, materials. For the last 100 years, and probably much more, I could show that it's always defined by architecture. I mean, if furniture is going to be made out of a bent tube, it's an architect that bends the tube. If it's made out of bent wood, it's an architect that bends the wood. If the furniture is going to grow to the scale of a kitchen unit, it's an architect that does that. It really is architecture which looks at craft, marketing, distribution, economy of materials, manufacturing, all these things and comes up with proposals. Once they're proposed, you know, somebody else comes in and works out the 75 different ways you can bend a tube. But it's almost always architecture that provokes the thoughts that makes the future possible for all these things. So I don't really think that we're a service industry that just does a good job at what we know what to do. I think we have to wake up every morning and say we don't know what our job is, because our job is figuring out what the future is going to be. And in every case, in fashion, design, even graphics, it's the architects that set the term. I mean, there was deconstruction in architecture 10 years before there was Miyake and Yamamoto. There was postmodernism in architecture before there was Philippe Starck in Memphis and all this stuff. It's really our job to lead. And I think that we think we're followers and that we're a service industry. We're really not. We're the creative inventors of the future. And so I agree, we do have to do a good job. But I also think we need to play with the new stuff enough that we can give a few cues for all the industries that follow us.
Sorry, there's another side of your question, regarding technology. Today, I feel like, we may know a little bit more about technology, but as architects, we do not know a whole lot, because our job really is to work with all the other experts. For a project in my office now, you engage the typical structural engineer and MEP, mechanical engineer, but also you collaborate with energy experts and facade experts, all kind of experts in this very rather specialized field. I think what we do, you may know some, you may not, but really it's learn to work with this very complex kind of a problem and this rather big team.
Thank you.
Just a minor comment.
Just to know if there is any other question. Yes. So perhaps just
the problem seems to be semantic, and it's an open question. It's not directed to you only. Is that if we start by understanding that this myth of the 19th century that was to discuss about technology, higher or low, technology as salvation of the world or technology as destruction of the world, if we don't break it, we're really not moving forward. And I see the discourse pretty much looping around the same ideas. So it is apparently semantic, but maybe is a way of starting understanding. I know that you have an intentionality in what you do, but maybe it's when you address a certain public, if the word floats in the air like that, becomes this abstract value that you see all over the place being used against or in favor, and we never discuss it sufficiently, which is the key issue now. But it was by no means an intention of detracting of your work as architects. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you talked about architecture being about the building the future, but I also think about it being about building the present. And apparently in certain zones of the world, I understand that there's a situation in China where schools have collapsed, but government buildings haven't. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on building practices in China and what it takes to build solid buildings. There are cyclone-resistant buildings as well.
First of all, I think I know in the Western media, this kind of opposition of school buildings and governmental buildings was sort of established, but in reality, it's buildings built prior to mid-90s, often during these major earthquakes in the collapse, and buildings built after the mid-90s would stand up. A lot of these governmental buildings were rather new buildings. That was the reason. So what really, there is ethical issues, there is code issues, and so on. Why all these mid-90 buildings didn't stand up? But there's one important issue for us as architects is the fact the builders, the designers, despite corruption and so on, they were pretty ignorant. It's not like the government officials' kids went to school in the governmental building. They went to these schools, eventually, got killed there, and the contractors' children got killed in these buildings anyway. So what do we do? As architects, how can we channel, again, our knowledge to the people who badly need them? So what I really don't have the answer, but what I am doing is that we're starting a website which is called Do Architecture Yourself, simply. And it's about putting onto this website little cartoons of how to do something in terms of design and building. And hopefully, people who likes to know how to make a safer foundation would go on to this website and figure it out. And I just cut it short. That's what we are starting to do. I didn't. The idea of a website is ours. It's contemporary. But there is a British architect. His name is Laurie Baker. He's been doing that. He's no longer around. He did it for like 50 years of that in India. Anyway, he produced all these little handbooks full of cartoons, like how to site a building on a steep slope, how to make a less expensive window, and so on. Yeah.
Any other question? Please.
First, thank you very much for our lectures. I have a specific question for Mr. Greg Lynn. First of all, I like your approach of using industrial products and the way you use it even for your own house, like the prefabricated stuff and things. And I think it's also not something very new, like architects used it in the 20s, like Le Corbusier, and they accepted the machine and then brought it into their designs. But I think over the decades, it brought also sort of a danger with it, which is the sort of the mass producing. And we can see this in all our suburbs around. And then I think at that point we lose this sort of individualism, what architecture is actually seeking for. And it all looks alike. And sometimes, yeah, you get lost. And I think you have these suburbs in LA too, even more than we have it here in Montreal. And I was wondering how you, as an architect, how do you make sure you keep an individualism and not falling into this mass producing and have this all monotony and stuff? Mm-hmm. So,
well, I would just say that in everything I do, not just building projects, but also industrial products, I try to have a signature, and I try to keep the signature. It's not like something where we say, does this look enough like the rest of the stuff? But it's more just the way that I work and the continuity. I try to have everything be related in some way. And I think where you get into problems of anonymous mass production is when you try to do things that are anonymous. And in my own work, I always try to give things a character and a quality and even a level of kind of strangeness or, fun pop culture, color and material and all that stuff so that they're not anonymous. But, I don't really see myself trying to establish a new kind of anonymous universal style or something like that. And to me, you can't have anonymous repetition unless you define a style that's pretty anonymous. So,
please.
I'm not so worried.
Can you come here?
Thanks for coming. This is very interesting. I'm a big fan of your work, Greg, and the question is, how's the progress in the project of Arc of the World in Costa Rica? Nothing happening?
Well, they got a new president who has new priorities. So yeah, I think the Arc of the World probably won't go. Yeah.
Okay. Is it for? Can somebody else buy the project? No.
Yeah, if they have a tropical jungle somewhere, yeah.
I think I would like to close now, but I would like to have one last question for both of you. What are you teaching now at school, both of you, Greg and Yango?
You go ahead.
Well, in Vienna and UCLA, this last term, we did spaceports. because I'm very interested in the fact of, for so long, architects dreamed of outer space and the space program and colonies in space and things like this. And by coincidence, somebody said, oh, yeah, we were working with Norman Foster on his new spaceport. I said, what? And they said, oh, yeah, Norman Foster's designing this spaceport in New Mexico. And then another friend of mine said, would I send some materials and go in on the proposal for the inside of the new spaceship? And we lost to Philippe Starck. But so the idea that they're building a spaceship with Philippe Starck doing black crystal chandeliers or whatever's going to happen in there, and Norman Foster's doing the spaceport, and my students seem to have absolutely, not the horsepower to address the problem. I thought we better get going. So we're looking at all the kind of the existing things that are happening in response to space tourism, as well as some of the proposals for, overnight hotels and things like that people are proposing.
And you?
So last semester I taught with two of my colleagues at MIT studio about the design of the city. So students actually, it's very much related to what I was saying earlier. We think not only that it's possible to design city, and you have to design the city if you want to be more sustainable and so on. So the studio was very much about this optimism of having still original models for city today. And then in the fall, I'm gonna, again, because I'm the head of department, usually I teach with someone. We're gonna do a studio with an architect who are based in Hong Kong but teaches in practices in Taiwan to design a school for the earthquake zone. It's sponsored by folks back in China.
Okay, so I think that we can close now. So thank you very much. I think that it was very interesting. Next year it will be totally different, I'm sure. Last year was totally different. You see urgency. You define that in a lot of different ways. So thank you very much, and we hope to have you soon again here. Thank you.
This was a video podcast from the Canadian Centre for Architecture. For more information about this and other CCA programs and events, please visit www.cca.qc.ca.